Hello and welcome everyone. This is your mentor, your host, Mr. Akash. Now, children, we've already dealt a lot with nouns, with adjectives. So, we are thorough with these two concepts. Prior to nouns and adjectives, we had earlier covered up topics like clauses and phrases. So, you need to keep all these in mind in order to delve or dive into the next concept called verbs. So we are now into the world of verbs. Now, children, every word has its own importance in a sentence, as I told you earlier. Moreover, you have to start learning on momentary basis, not on daily basis. Every moment you confront a concept in English, of English, you have to immediately grasp it and then inculcate it, practically instigate it, practically inculcate it in your learnings. So this learning has to be a spontaneous process. We as teachers are in a continuous, in a spontaneous process of learning every day. Please trust me on that. All right, so let's proceed. Now, children, there are several definitions to words, whereas the most precise and the best explained is doing words are called verbs, whereas I declare it to be perfectly imperfect. Because doing words that do something, words don't do anything. There are doers, there are subjects, there are nouns that do something. So verbs that show action, words that depict action are called verbs. This is how it goes, right? So doing words, it's a wrong concept, it's a wrong way to interpret. It's no correct English here. So verbs are simply words or phrases. Mind you, I'm not using the word clause here. Verbs are phrases, or verbs are words that depict action, that exhibit action, that tells us in a sentence that something is being done or is happening or has happened, right? So let's take down the definition from here. Now, verbs are an essential part of a sentence. It's not a definition here. Why are we studying verbs? This is the main motive that has been highlighted in the present screen. So verbs are an essential part of a sentence that make up for a major part of sense in a sentence. Now, why do I want to highlight this word sense? Because sense is something that is always related to everything. Any senseless thing will have no value. It is futile, right? So verbs are something that gives a different parameter to your concept of English. So verbs, what do verbs account for? Verbs are words that account for, first of all, actions. If something is happening, if something has happened, if something is going to happen. So these are tenses that I'm referring to with the help of verbs. So verbs account for actions. Second, time when actions happen. And when they consider the second parameter, that is time when actions happen, that means they want to, or the verbs want to point out at the tense of the sentence. So verbs are simply defined as words or phrases that refer to actions and are informants of the time at which the action happens or has already happened or will happen. Okay, so informants. I could have also rewritten this and interpreted it in simple form like, and inform us about the time at which the action happens. So this is where you have to develop your vocabulary. I did not use that entire phrase which says, and they also inform. Rather, I chose to write a precise word called informants. They are informants of the time at which the action happens or has already happened or might happen in the future. Okay, so in a way, they here refers to the term verbs, but not all of them, of course. They also target the tense in a sentence. Now, there are a variety of verbs, children, where some of the verbs will definitely target the tense. They will short in an outwardly fashion give you the tense in a sentence. But again, there are other verbs in a complex form that will definitely not refer to a tense, but they will stand as verbs. So we're going to cover all this. We're going to traverse through this, but in a sequential manner. Let's see what we have further. Now, categories of verbs. The first is finite verbs. I've divided into two columns here. Why? Because these are theoretical. This is what we are dealing with out here, is theoretical knowledge. Theory will never help you speak in English. The implementation of theory while you are speaking to someone, while you are establishing conversation with people, at that point of time, if you're inculcating these values, this is where and this is what will increase your speaking ability, your linguistic skills. If you don't do that, you will still lag behind with a bit lot. So let's see. We are talking about categories of verbs. The left column gives you the types of verbs, and the right column gives you what exactly are the types of verbs that we have or we need to understand in order to bring a sentence to the correct sense. Now, finite verbs, non-finite verbs, transitive verbs, intransitive verbs. These are the types of verbs that we need to understand, because at times there are prepositions attached to some, that means a few of these verbs. So if we don't understand this concept, we will miss on those prepositions, which eventually give us the wrong form of English, right? The erroneous English. So we don't need to deal with errors while writing or reading or speaking English. So therefore, we need to know a bit about what are we going to talk about, what are we going to write in English. So first is finite verbs, non-finite verbs, transitive verbs, intransitive verbs. I'm going to take it quite gradually. Gradually simply means steady and slow, but we will definitely progress moment by moment. So first we're going to talk about finite verbs in this video. Let's go ahead. A finite verb. The verb that is accompanied with a subject in a sentence is a finite verb. So the first definition is very simple. That means the moment you see a verb that is closely or the subject in a sentence will definitely stand out to be a finite verb. There is no other categorization for that verb. If it's next to the subject in a sentence, it is definitely going to end up in the family of finite verb. Let us give another shape to this definition. A finite verb shows agreement with the subject in a sentence. That highlights the tense. So the eventual purpose of a finite verb is to highlight a tense. This is very simple. If the tense is very clear, out and bold, when you're writing a verb, it will stand as a finite verb only, or provided the condition of establishing the tense is fulfilled. So it's very easy, right? Okay, the last line over here gives you, that is in bracket, gives you subject verb concord. That means there is an association, there is an agreement between the subject and the verb. So that is something that we're going to study after we deal with what kinds of verbs are there and how many verbs do we have. All right. So for the time being, we're dealing only with what finite verbs are and how do we use them in a sentence. Now here, let's see what are the bottom lines here. The first line or the first point to be noted down is that most finite verbs, when I say most, that does not mean all. So most means a maximum number of, right? So most finite verbs can take an ed or a d at the end of the word to indicate time in the past. So I've used 3 examples here to be very precise with what I'm trying to explain. The base form of the verb, that is the infinitive form of the verb, is create, which has been changed to he created. Why? Because here I'm targeting the past tense. So he created, then somebody else celebrated his birthday, her birthday, or celebrated some anniversary or something else. It can be any situation at all. Madhav shouted. Now here, if you see shout, you either shout out to something, to someone, you either shout at someone. So here I'm using shout out preposition, that is out. Shout at, again at is a preposition. So once we deal with what type of verbs do we have to study about, we will definitely be able to comprehend the fact that which preposition adjusts or agrees with which you what tense has been used here. So created, it is surely a finite verb. The second point here to be noted is that with a third person singular subject, third person means when you're not referring to yourself, but you're referring to somebody else you could be in a conversation with. That's called third person. So with a third person singular subject, that means the third person does not mean it has to be many people. So it has to be a single person only. So I'm talking about he, she, or it, right? I cannot say they or them. That's third person in plural. But if I talk about he, she, that's third person in singular. He means one male person. She means one female person. It means one. I'm not going to talk about gender now because I'm using a neutral gender, a common gender, in fact, that is it. Okay, a neutral gender, it. So he, she, it. Finite verbs accept an S at their end to indicate time in the present. Now, if you're confused with this is a different set of rules here which governs the English language, where most of us go wrong. So this will be covered as a different module altogether. So you don't have to worry about it for the time being. Only remember that he, she, and it, when you combine this with a verb, or let us say when you use a verb right following these three words, you will have to use an S at the end to indicate the time in present. For the past, you need a D or an ed at the end of the main verb, the base form of the verb, that is the infinitive form of the verb, but not in all of them, of course. The first thing that we've discussed. And if you want to go to the, if you want to target or hit the present tense, you only have to use an S at the end that will look like a plural of that. Every year, or 22nd July every year. Now Madhav shouts at his dog every time he moves out of the house without permission, right? Okay, so finite verbs usually follow their subjects. So the moment you find a verb written right after the subject in a sentence, that means you are right now looking at or you're reading a finite verb. So that's a simple indication, a confirmed indication कि जैसे ही किसी सब्जेक्ट के इमीडिएटली बाद कोई भी वर्ब यूज होता है जो आपको टेंस दिखा रहा है, वो वर्ब 100% एक फिनाइट वर्ब है. Like we watched. Now we watched a movie, we watched somebody walk around something. We can watch anything, absolutely anything, right? So we watched. Watch tells you WATCH, that ed at the last or as the suffix tells you or indicates that the action has been done in the past and it's done now. The phone buzzed. Adapter buzz fuses every time I plug it in. Now here the only thing is that we are talking about the verbs that are being directly used right after the subject, like we the subject, then watched the verb. Phone, the subject, buzzed the verb. Adapter is the subject, fuses is the verb. So we are here not concerned about the tense of the sentence. The last point to be noted down: if there is just one verb used in a sentence, it will be treated as a finite verb unconditionally, and that verb will be capable enough to support itself and stand alone as a tense director. यूज किया जाएगा. Let's go ahead. Other examples. Now you've got examples of verbs here. I'm going to use simple verbs over here in this table. I've used promise, I've used depart, I've used forecast, I've used forgive, contract. This is a very simple list of all the examples of verbs that are quite simple and that we use quite often, right? Agree to, agree for a condition, agree to a situation, or agree to a person, agree to an opinion, promise somebody for something, then appear at or appear, then come in, come out, come off, then you've got seem. Now what you will understand right from the very first look that you take at a verb here is that if I say love, it is the first form, that is the infinitive form. The second will be the form called past form, that is simple past form, that will be loved. And the third is going to be the past participle form, that again will stand as loved. Now if I talked about these three words, that was present form, that is the infinitive, or the base form. तीनों ही एक चीज़ हैं. Second comes, or second in line, is the simple past form, and the third is past participle form. We are going to discuss it in different modules so that we have a thorough knowledge and of course understanding. As I told you earlier at the right at the beginning of my video, that understanding has to be a spontaneous process. Learning has to be a spontaneous process, that go together hand in hand. If you're learning and you're not understanding, hand in hand, then of course that's the most productive way of studying anything at all. Let's talk about the next set of examples. There are a lot of examples that you usually don't use, possibly because lack of words is a problem. As I told you in the very beginning of my classes, that vocabulary is always a boon in one's life. Attenuate simply means to lower down, to lessen down the impact of something, right? Then highlight. Intimidate means to threaten somebody, right? To be. Then mitigate means, let us say, there are ointments that mitigate the pain, like for example Volini is an ointment or a spray that mitigates pain, so it lowers down the impact, or it lowers down the intensity of pain. Calculate, vibrate, teach, alight. Now light is something very different, alight is something very different. Alight means to sit on something, to come from somewhere and directly land somewhere and then sit over there. Like for example, if I say the bird perched on one of the branches of the tree, so that's perched, right? Or alighted. Vacate means to empty something very quickly. Then shimmer means to glow, right? Okay, now there are a few examples that have been written in red. What's the purpose? Now children, apart from the types of nouns, English also sees and accepts some casual approach, that is using nouns as verbs. I call it casual because that's not the ethical way you use it. Then there is always room and space for creativity, and this is what we have created. That should have been written in red, that is in the fifth column of the second row. The word is clock. Now clock, again, you have a wall clock, right? That's a wrist watch, so smaller in size. It's a watch that can be that is portable and can be transported, can be moved along, whereas clock is something that is fixed to a particular thing, and it, again, the purpose is the same, to reveal time to us. So everything that has been written in red here is basically a noun, but is being used as a verb, or can be used as a verb, right? Scale, everybody knows what a scale or a ruler is, right? It's an elongated rectangular piece of plastic, or maybe that's steel, or maybe wood. So it's a wooden scale that helps us measure length up to several centimeters. A foot scale gives you 30 centimeters. A half foot scale gives you 15 centimeters, right? So scale. If I'm going to make use of a few of these nouns as verbs in few examples so that we understand what are we dealing with here, what exactly do we need to shape up from here. Jacket, everybody wears a jacket when it's cold outside, but then I'm going to use it as a verb. Okay, let's go to an example right here itself. Jacket. Now if I say a copper wire is jacketed using rubber wire, or is simply jacketed using rubber in different sorts of wires, right? So jacketed means it's been covered, right? Shelter, a shelter is a home. Like I am right now currently sitting in a shelter. That's my home, that's my abode. Similarly, you are watching me, you're sitting Gandhi ji was sheltered by Rajkumar Shukla at his home when Gandhi ji went to Champaran district in Bihar, from where he actually initiated or started his freedom movement, right? So that is sheltered. Okay, dance. Dance is a noun as well as a verb. She danced beautifully. She dances well. So, in a way, I'm using this as a verb. So, it can always be done. Talk about sift and sieve. A sieve is basically an object जो आप छलनी बोलते हैं, छन्नी, जिससे we basically sift things. Sift, छानना, right? So, sift and sieve. I sieved the flour, or I sieved, or I sifted the flour. Both are correct, whereas one is a noun, the other is primarily a verb. Sift is a verb, sieve is a noun. जो छन्नी होती है वो sieve है. लेकिन I can also use sieve as a verb instead of being a noun. Tutor. Now he tutored him good, or he tutored him to excellence. Tutored means, what's the difference between a teacher and a tutor? A teacher is meant to take several students at once. So, in very unlikely to a tutor who only basically teaches a single person. So, that's the difference. Demolish. Demolish means to break down, right? Next up, we've got a little higher category of verbs. Fertilize, jeopardize. Jeopardize simply means to put somebody in a dangerous situation, in an ominous environment. Abscond. Abscond means to not be present at a place where you're supposed to be. Abandon. Abandon means to that's jinx. Martyr. Martyr means to sacrifice your life for your patriotism or in the name of being a patriot. Then jumpstart means to boost or to give an impactful start. Then deprive means to not have simple amenities that are actually needed to live your life. Yearn means to be quite accepting, or to be quite I should say inclusive, right? Hinge means to be fixed to something. For example, if I say a door is hinged right at the wall, so hinged means it's been fixed there. So this is something that we must use, because these are very general verbs. These are very general. They have general meaning. Everything that we do, we take vaccines the moment we are ill, but we don't use the word vaccinate, right? We don't choose to use such difficult or such new words. So that's the problem with us, which needs to be eradicated and uprooted completely. Of course, gradually. Immediately to nahi ho paega. Take some time. Include all these words step by step, and you will definitely earn a lot in terms of your linguistic skills. Alright children, let's quote a few examples in sentences so that we understand how do we make use of them, right? We do have to understand first, the chronological order says first, get through as many words as possible. Second, understand their meaning. The third is their utility, right? So here we're dealing with step number 3, that is utility. The chauffeur drove me around the city. Now children, there are many exotic words from different languages that have now been accepted in the English language. For example, pyjamas from Hindi, garam masala from Hindi. These are all Hindi words that have been now included in the English dictionary. So here in the same manner, the second word, that is chauffeur, it's a French word. Usually that represents a person who has been hired to drive you around. It's very simple. It's very similar to a pilot or to a driver, right? So the chauffeur drove me around the city. Now here, drove is a verb that decides. For a word or a verb to be approved as a finite verb was that the first was that it should appear right after the noun or the subject that it is being used for. Second, it should be decisive of the tense in a sentence. तो जैसे ही वो noun के बाद आता है, या फिर वो एकमात्र tense verb है, या फिर वो decide कर सकता है. It has the capability to decide कि ये कौन सा tense बन रहा है sentence का. If these 3 conditions are fulfilled, then that means that can be nominated, or that verb can be nominated as a finite tense. A finite verb. So the chauffeur drove me around the city. Drove is the word that gives us the surety or the certainty of the fact that the sentence has been framed in simple past tense. So it is a tense decider, therefore drove becomes a finite verb. He mistakenly locked the dog out of the car. The mountains are capped with snow. This device clocks every vehicle that does or that travels at 50 kilometers per hour. It is difficult to scale mountains. Now, children, we are not focusing and we are not really bothered about what tense are we writing the sentence in. Here, we are going to lay or emphasis or entire focus on the verbs that we are using. Now, if I talk about the last three verbs in the last three sentences or examples, I see capped, I see clocks, and I see scale. All these three are objects that you can touch, you can feel, you can see using your eyes. So that means they primarily or basically belong to the category or to the family of nouns, but they are being innovatively used as. Now, if we talk about the last three sentences, we see three different verbs being used here. But children, when you lay some focus on it, you see that we are using the base form. If we talk about the base forms of these three respective verbs, they come out to be cap for capped, clock for clocks, and scale for scale, right? So we are talking about three objects. I'm not talking about verbs anymore right now. We're talking about three objects. One is cap, the second is clock, and the third is scale. So that means we're talking about nouns. Anything that can be touched or can be perceived through senses, human senses, is called a noun, if you remember, right? So we are using nouns innovatively as verbs here. So cap has been used as capped, which means to cover something. Clock here to register something. Scale here to climb something or to cover up something, to cover a distance here. So the more brainstorming you do, the better you understand. So children, there is one key to success and there is one key to understand everything. So practice must be the key in all linguistic modules. For example, you might have a French teacher as well. If your French teacher is dealing with grammar or the portion or modules of grammar in French, you will have to exercise it. You don't only have to listen to him, or you don't only have to just write. So unless you exercise it, it's a futile way of learning a language, because language is purely a practical concept. It is needed to establish contact. And to establish contact, you need to speak with others. And to speak with others, you need a fluency in your linguistic skills. So children, please stay safe. God bless you. Eat healthy. Thank you.